Hi guys, how's it going? In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about talking about artwork, specifically about critiquing. Um, let's talk about what that means first before we actually get into it. A critique is something that sometimes scares people, and it should not. By definition, a critique is the act of giving criticism to something and trying to better it in the process. Sometimes called creative criticism, sometimes calling it feedback. You can call it all sorts of things. But critique is something that we use on a regular basis when we work within graphic arts. And you're to the point now where you've built enough stuff. Now we have to start thinking about it from a critique standpoint and talking about artwork and talking about design work. And we're going to start not talking about our own stuff. We're going to start talking about other people's stuff simply because it's easier because we don't know the people that made it. And that's okay. So, talking about artwork is, again, it's not hard to do, but it's something that you have to do. It's necessary when we're dealing with creative individuals and creative artwork and design and any of this stuff. Simply, it's necessary because in order to get better at what we do, we just need to listen to other people every now and then. And it's also not hard because there are steps that you can take that make talking about art really easy. Sometimes people talk about art simply from an emotional standpoint, and that's okay. Art does make you feel a certain way. But sometimes art doesn't make you feel anything. Like, take this, for example, that we see on the screen. This is an advertisement in a magazine for Cheez-Its. Okay? Yeah, Cheez-Its. Just, a yummy, tasty snack cracker. That's all. It's nothing, high end. There's nobody living there dying because of a Cheez-It, okay? It's just something that you might find in your cabinet, or after this, video, you might want to go to the store and buy some because now you're craving it. But anyway, there's nothing here about this Cheez-It that we can talk about it, we can learn from it. We're not going to offend the Cheez-It box. We're not going to offend the Cheez-It ad. We're not even going to offend the person who made the ad if we talk about this and talk about what we think is successful and what we think is not successful. There's no emotional attachment here to this. There's nothing going on. And here's the thing. This is the kind of stuff, this is the kind of artwork that you're probably going to make in life. Things that maybe don't have emotional attachments, but they advertise something. They're 100% going to be used for maybe a certain time of year or even a certain year per se, and it's commercial. It's 100% commercial, and that's okay. That's part of what graphic designers do. So again, this is just an image from an ad. Okay, it's a magazine ad. And it says, we can just point out the obvious, right? It's a Cheez-It ad because we see that there's some Cheez-It boxes on the bottom, and it says Cheez-It, period, the big cheese. And then there's like a little registered trademark. And then inside we have a Cheez-It, and it says big cheese taste in every bite. And it's in a font you could read pretty easily, and surrounding it are just like little wedges of cheese that make it appear kind of like it's a big mouth and it's going to eat it. Okay, so we can talk about it just like that. It's spot on the nose what it is. But a better way to talk about artwork or design work in general is to talk about these things. When you think about critique, you want to critique vocabulary. And the easiest vocabulary, and I realize now that I just did this incorrectly, and I'm just going to fix it because it's going to drive me nuts if I don't, is this right here. Those are the principles of design, not the principles of whatever I had written there before, dine or whatever. There, that's a little bit better. Okay. at least for me. But anyway, so we have the elements of art and the principles of design. If you go back to module 2, we talked about these things. The elements of art are the building blocks of all works of art out there, including commercial advertisements for Cheez-Its. And the principles of designs are the rules that we use to go ahead and use the art correctly. So if we use these vocabulary words when we're talking about this thing here, then it's going to work out way better than if we just try to talk about the emotional attachment that we might have to in a Cheez-It, right? It's just easier to talk about. So, let's just kind of like point things out and see what we can, figure out here. So right away, I see, I'll do the elements first, then I'll do the principles. And it's okay if I don't have everything, if I don't talk about everything, but I'll try to talk about as much as I can. So I see, shape right away and form. I see the implied form because the cheese wedges, they are three-dimensional and they have highlights and they have shadows, right? And I see that the shape that they're making, it's an implied shape, but they're making a mouth shape. And, the Cheez-It itself, this little guy, he's right in the center of this mouth, and it looks like it could close right into him. And it does say that it's a big cheese taste in every bite. So when they close the mouth, right, all these wedges of cheese are going to meet each other, and that's a big cheese taste, right? Color-wise, we've got a really warm color scheme happening here, probably like an analogous warm color scheme, because we're working with yellows, we're working with oranges, we're working with reds, right? We also have this cool kind of gradient happening here that, radiates like darker in the center and it gets brighter as it comes out, so it's a radial gradient. There is without a doubt texture here. It's not real texture, it's implied because it's on a 2D piece of paper, but there's texture here on the cracker itself, but then also actually right in the blocks of cheese and the wedges of cheese, you can see that texture there. There is a little texture here too, but I think that's just from that the paper is a little bit older. I mentioned before form, there's implied form here. These feel like they're three-dimensional, again, because they're photographs of real wedges of cheese. And overall, this is utilizing space pretty well in general, because it feels like there is enough empty space for the cheese to live in to get the message across, but it still feels like there's a mouth there. And then there's enough space down here where we've got the little boxes down here and their catchphrase, Cheez-It, the big cheese, and it feels like there's enough space there. So right there's the elements of art. Okay, so they're all there. They're present. The principle is design, right? Contrast. We see contrast multiple ways. There's contrast between the cracker itself and the real wedges of cheese. There's contrast between the colors that we're seeing here in the cheese and in the cracker and in the text and in the background. It makes everything stand out. There's somewhat of a lack of contrast with the bright red down here and the Cheez-It boxes, so they put a drop shadow on there, again, to try to make it stand out. And you do also see contrast here with this other catchphrase. Repetition is really noticeable here. We see it in more than one way. We see it in the wedges of cheese and the way that they're arced. There's 5 on the top and there's 5 on the bottom. We see it in the text that's being used. The same exact font that is being used here, I want to say it's called Copperplate. It's being used here in Big Cheese Taste in every bite. It's also being used here, but in all capitals. Here it's like a large capital and a smaller capital. Here they're all large capitals, but it's the same font. I'm positive of that. So we have a repetition there. We also have a repetition with multiple boxes of Cheez-Its. Okay, and that logo being shown over and over again. Notice the logo is only seen on the box. We don't see it anywhere else, okay, because I think everybody knows what a Cheez-It is. Alignment. This is aligned really well, because what alignment does is either creates order or creates chaos, and this is a really ordered ad. Again, we have the 5 wedges on the top and the 5 wedges on the bottom, and we have the small square in the middle with the line of text. It's just really successfully aligned. There's a real healthy proximity with everything. The cheese wedges are close to one another. They're just slightly touching one another in many ways. Sometimes they're not. Also, along with that, we have this Cheez-It here in the middle that feels like it's kind of going to have its impending doom, if you would. It's about to have its mouth closed on. No issue, or excuse me, it's not so much no issue. There seems to be like there's going to be an issue there for it. Like, it's about to meet its maker in many ways. There also is enough space in between all the different objects and all the text. Nothing feels like it's on top of one another unless it's intended to be right here where the cheese is, trying to create that mouth shape. There's a wonderful balance to this. Again, 5 on top, 5 below, little square in the center, and we have the text underneath here. And then again, while it's not a square, it holds a very similar visual weight as this, and then text underneath it. So it's really balanced. And from an emphasis standpoint, again, this square right here in the center, it's getting really emphasized. It's surrounded by the teeth on top and the teeth below. It's got just enough space inside or between that and the text, so it really pops, and this also does too. And also there's that radial gradient that surrounds this, and it works its way out, so it's nice and bright there, and it's darker here, so it stands out just enough compared to the rest of the cheese as well. So you see again that the principles of design were used here when we were creating it. So since the elements of art are present, and since the principles of design are present, it's not hard to talk about this thing and talk about it. And when you talk about it, you also want to go ahead and you want to put your own spin on it. Like, do you like it? Do you not like it? I'll tell you what, art teachers hate that word like. We can't stand it, in fact. Rather than that, try to use the word successful. Yes, it is successful. No, it's not successful. And be prepared to back it up. So, let's see how this sounds. And it's okay if it's not perfect, but let's see how this sounds. And it's okay because, you know what, I don't know the person that made this, and even if they did hear me critique it, I don't think they'd be upset. So, okay. So a critique on this Cheez-It ad. Ultimately, I feel that this is a successful ad for Cheez-Its because, it says there's big cheese taste in every bite, and I really believe it when I have those wedges of cheese that are surrounding this lone, poor little Cheez-It. And I feel like it's going to be an explosion of cheese just based on that. When the mouth closes, all those wedges are going to meet, and it's going to, it's going to be really, for lack of a better word, cheesy. The image in general is utilizing, implied line. It's using, a lot of shape. The color is used very wisely with an analogous color scheme that really feels warm and draws me right into the center with this little gradient right here. It brings me right into the center, right at this, at that Cheez-It where I think they want me to be. And that forms an emphasis area. And that emphasis is also extremely balanced. Down here, we have another emphasis area in the boxes of Cheez-Its. And again, it almost feels like it's the same exact one because we have this image here, and then we have text underneath it, and then we have this image here and text underneath it as well. So again, we have nice kind of bright colors, and and then in the center here, we have that kind of darker color that's just dramatic enough to draw me in. There is tons of contrast, and there's a lot of repetition, again, which makes multiple points of emphasis for me. And I feel like everything is in its place. So it really, there's no proximity problems that I can see whatsoever. The texture on not only the cracker, but on the cheese wedges themselves, make me feel like it's real and make me hungry and make me want to go ahead and, buy some Cheez-Its, to be honest with you, or go find some, like Wisconsin cheddar. And, the cheese itself and the Cheez-It, they have an implied form. Again, I know it's a two-dimensional plane. I know it's a piece of paper, but it feels like there's more going on there. And the artist that created this really understood space very well. And it feels, while open and there's a lot of empty negative space, it doesn't feel like there's too much, and it doesn't feel like there's not enough. So they have got a really good relationship between their positive space and their negative space. And ultimately, that's why I feel this is a successful ad. And guys, that's it. That's it. I didn't have to talk about how I felt. I made some jokes about how it made me hungry. I didn't have to talk about, like, how red means a lot to my heart and therefore I'm exploding or some weird crap like that. I just talked about the elements and I just talked about the principles. I talked about the building blocks that should be there and that are there. And then I talked about the rules and how they're being applied and if they're being applied effectively or they're not. And ultimately, I thought this was a successful piece. Have I seen other ads that are unsuccessful? You better believe it. And at the end of the day, it's my opinion whether it's successful or it's unsuccessful. When you are talking to each other about your artwork, and if you find things that are unsuccessful, that might be a time where you can go ahead and you can offer or provide an idea. Maybe you could try this, maybe you could try that. But we're not quite there yet. So I'm going to give you a couple assignments where I'm going to ask you to find a piece of graphics in your world. And this is a perfect example. This is an advertisement in a magazine that I simply just, pulled out. Something along those lines. I do not want you to pull things off the internet. I want you to look in real world. Look at your cereal box. Look at that piece of junk mail. Look at, that magazine. Look at the movie poster on your wall. Take a photo of it, and I want you to go ahead and I want you to write me some critiques. And you don't have to get crazy with them. Couple paragraphs, 2-3 paragraphs is probably going to be more than enough. But I want you to start getting familiar and comfortable about talking about artwork, talking about design. And then by the end of the semester, we're going to start talking to each other about our work. Okay. Again, when we get out of like just the mechanics and the the ABCs of our softwares, and we start making more choices with our projects. So that's where we're going, and you can expect to to see more than one, probably about 2 or 3 of these kinds of assignments as the semester progresses in this module and also in our next module as well. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to contact me. But again, don't use the internet. Find real graphics in your world. And if it stands out to you, perfect. That's a great way to use it. And it could stand out to you because it's awesome or because it's awful. Either can work, and you can learn from a lot of things. You're going to be a graphic designer, and when you appreciate this art when you start finding like fun little things in the everyday mundane things, like a Cheez-Its ad. So, hope to see some of your critiques and see what you guys are saying about it. Thank you.